Good evening. I have exactly 5:30. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out this evening for this information session. I really do appreciate all the interest, all the concerns, and the support that's been offered to our city. Before I start, we have several council members here. Will you please stand, council members, and face the audience? All council members that are present. Thank you so very, very much. Appreciate that. Our city manager is here. Joe King, will you please stand? Thank you. Our city attorney is here as well, Mr. Clark Whitfield. Will you please stand? Thank you. We do have Delegate Danny Marshall, who's here as well. Thanks for coming, sir. We have Christopher Collins from Senator Kane's office. Chris, I know you're here in the back. Okay, thank you for coming as well. And we have Sam Taylor from Senator Warner's office here. Do appreciate that. And we have a special guest who will facilitate this entire process. Let me just say, yes, Danville is concerned about this matter. Yes, I believe the drinking water is safe. The drinking water is safe. Been treated by our staff, and I have every confidence in our staff. There are other issues that need to be resolved, and at this point, I want to thank everyone again for your questions, for your comments, and for your suggestions. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to the Director of the Department of Environmental Quality, Mr. David K. Paylor, who will facilitate the rest of the meeting. Mr. Paylor. Welcome, sir.
Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, and thanks to everybody for being here. We have some representatives here from DEQ, from the Health Department, from the Game Department. I've got a couple of EPA folks here. And what I wanted to do today was to give you all an update on what's happened, what the current status is, and where we go from here. Give you plenty of time for questions. I think we need to be out of here by 6:30 or very shortly after that. So what I would like to do is spend about 10 or 15 minutes giving you a brief overview of where we are, and then spend most of the time seeing if we can answer your questions. So with that, as most of you know, the spill occurred at Duke Energy on the 2nd of February. You saw some numbers as high as 80,000 tons of ash that were lost. That's been recalibrated. We feel like we lost, like Duke Energy lost about 39,000 tons of coal ash. And we had EPA on-scene coordinators, we had NC Diener, and we had DEQ on scene pretty quickly. Obviously, the immediate first thing that we needed to do was stop discharging ash to the river. This is a site map. Many of you have seen this. That yellow line is the stormwater drain that went under the pond that collapsed, and that's where the ash that was in that pond exited the pond and made it into the river. What is coal ash? It's residue that's generated from burning coal. Generally, historically, power plants have stored that residue in ponds or placed it in landfills. It's got a variety of constituents. It's mostly silicon oxide, iron oxide, and aluminum oxide, but as you know, it's got trace amounts of a number of toxic mostly metals that are in it. You can think of coal ash as being similar to the ash that you have after you've burned wood in the fireplace. You've got some residue left over. So immediately we began monitoring at the drinking water intakes and the finished water. You've heard from the outset that the first contact practically that was made was to the Danville water treatment plant. They were already on it. They immediately started sampling their drinking water, and the finished water was always of of good drinking water quality, and the plant performed really well to take any of the ash that was of concern out. The pipe, this is a picture of one of the pipes. It was plugged. It took a while to plug it. There was a 48-inch pipe and a 36-inch pipe. The 36-inch pipe wasn't leaking coal ash per se, but that's been plugged as well. This has now successfully been plugged. And water quality, sediment, and fish monitoring are ongoing by Virginia DEQ, by North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and by EPA. One of the first things that EPA made sure was done was to get those booms out to capture as much coal ash as they could that was exiting the pond. That's where the majority of the real large piles of coal ash resided. This is just below where it was being discharged. That yellow boom is gone now because all of that ash has been successfully removed. I've actually been down, I was down there this afternoon, and the pipe's plugged off, and all of that ash has been removed. We are expecting to do some additional ash recovery just above the Schoolfield Dam because there's some accumulation there that's in a quantity that will be that would be good for recovery. We have gone back out and reposted the signs for the fish advisory along the Dan River. I guess I would emphasize that those signs were there before because of some advisories that you had for PCBs and mercury. The advisory is still only for PCBs and mercury, but those signs are back in place. Virginia DEQ has collected a number of water samples at a number of sites. All of our water samples were below water quality standards limitations. They were the water quality was good. No sediment levels were above our fresh water screening values. Those are values that we have established that would say we've got a cause for concern and we need to go back and do some more work. So the sediment levels were not elevated to an alarming level. Preliminary review of all the water quality data collected by EPA contractor shows that we essentially don't have exceedances of water quality standards. Now I should say water quality standards are the numbers that are set for protection of fish and aquatic life. Those are different numbers than you would have for drinking water, but when we looked at the drinking water numbers, we looked at drinking water standards. So those results have been good, and I think that's the reason that you found that we didn't have an immediately large-scale fish kill or anything as a result of this, because the water quality concentrations didn't get too high. We have collected some fish. 25 fish tissue samples were collected. The health department has reviewed those data and basically concluded that there are really no levels of concern in fish tissue right now. Can you eat the fish? PCBs and mercury are still a problem, but there are no additional problems yet as a result of this. Now that's what would be expected because it would take time for metals to accumulate in fish. That wouldn't be an immediate reaction that you would get. We will continue to collect fish samples over the coming years to see if we see any increases in fish tissue concentrations, and we'll share that information with the health department, and if there are any concerns, you will know it. And I've already mentioned that there is in fact a fish consumption advisory that's been in place for some time for PCB and mercury. We've looked at the fish tissue results that we've got right now. We are collecting all the water quality that we've gotten from North Carolina, from EPA, our own water quality data. We're going to continue to collect those data. We're going to continue to review them for any causes for concern. We need to get we have identified the Schoolfield Dam as one area where ash should be recovered. In some areas, the ash is so well dispersed that it would cause more harm to the river system to to dredge all that ash. We'd get more mud than we'd get ash, and it would cause more harm. And so we're not going to do it in those areas, but in areas where we can recover significant amounts of ash, we're going to do that. We need to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to do that, and we're working on that. So it's been stopped. I think many of you have read that North Carolina and Duke Energy are planning to close out that pond over the next 2 years. So we've got that under control. The water quality, or for the drinking water rather, has continued to be in good shape. We are identifying other actions, short-term actions, immediate actions that Duke Energy may need to take, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But the other thing is, the question is, so what damage was done to the river, to the fisheries, to birds, to recreation? And we will be evaluating that with the Fish and Wildlife Service and with North Carolina through a process that's called the Natural Resources Damage Assessment. I plan to be signing our part of the agreement today or tomorrow. North Carolina will sign, Fish and Wildlife Service will sign. That will launch a fairly intensive study with which the Fish and Wildlife Service has a lot of experience. And we will identify, what's been the damage, either to reproduction of fish or growth of fish or recreational concerns, so that Carr Reservoir gets, sees a downturn in recreation if that happens. We will monetize all of that. And the goal of all of that is to make sure that we have quantified the ecological damage and the recreational damage, so that we will then hold Duke Energy responsible for that, and that will then go towards rehabilitation and compensation for what those damages are. Now, that's a fairly long-term process. That'll take us a few years at least, because it's fairly complicated, but we want to make sure that we don't miss any of the actual impacts that were there, that wouldn't be immediately obvious. So that's what the long-term impact assessment is going to be. So before I get to that, I thought I had another slide, but let me just say, so there will be a couple of other things that we're doing. I met with Duke Energy, I believe it was last week. Might have been just the week before, but they came down, and one of the things that we talked about was the fact that a lot of money has been spent by state agencies, by cities and localities to respond to this, and that reimbursement for those expenses is a part of what we would expect. They have agreed to that. We are now in contact with the city of Danville, as well as South Boston and Clarksville, and we, DEQ, are volunteering. Duke Energy has agreed to attempt to come up with a memorandum of understanding, so that maybe DEQ can be the focal point for us to pass on costs from this spill to Duke Energy for reimbursement, and we're hoping that we can come up with a system so that the city of Danville and the health department and the other agencies can get periodic reimbursement for the costs that we've incurred as a result of responding to this spill. So that is underway. We will be working with EPA and North Carolina to identify what other actions are required to stabilize the system, to remove any risk that immediate risk that we can see, and we will look to Duke Energy to help to pay for that work being done. And then, of course, there's a Clean Water Act violation here, and we will be discussing the legal implications of that, and whatever compensation is required from Duke Energy because of the violation of the Clean Water Act. And then the final thing, piece of this will be the long-term natural resource damage assessment. Now, obviously the question comes, could this happen in Virginia? We have 11 ponds, which actually, in Virginia, which is actually a smaller number than a lot of states do. It just so happens that compliments of the TVA spill, EPA and Virginia, over the last couple of years, have actually done physical inspections of all 11 of our ponds. And last fall, a letter went to each of those owners of those ponds citing deficiencies basically in the impoundments, needing to stable the berms and that sort of thing. And those deficiencies have been addressed. There was one that is going to be, I think, is going to be finished up this month, and there's another one that's actually going to be closed out by the end of the summer. Out of those 11, we actually expect 5 of them to be on track to be closed out permanently by 2016. So we feel good that we have taken some actions to make sure that the ponds that we have in Virginia are stable, they're in good condition, and obviously we need to continue to be vigilant in that regard. That was my slide on doing energy accountable. Sorry. And so I believe I've covered these issues. DEQ is going to be a clearinghouse for direct payment. Duke Energy's agreed to that. We haven't completed the MOU yet, but we will. I'm very optimistic about that, and I think I've covered those issues. And so that leads us to questions. So we've got people here from the other agencies, and I'd like to try to do the best we can to answer the questions that you've got. Some of the landfills are earthen. Some of these landfills were built in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We are, in fact, reviewing groundwater quality data right now to determine if we have any concerns because of seepage, if that's the point of your question.
And my second question is why, I'm pretty loud. My second question is, why has it taken this long the ash is still not out of the river. Is it the planning that's taken so long for them to, who is making Duke get the ash out of the river?
Well, it's, who is making Duke get the ash out of the river? It's EPA and the state agencies as well. There's been a lot of precipitation, and it hasn't been safe to get in the river for some of these periods of time. I believe if we hadn't had high water, we would have gotten more ash by now. Also, some of that work requires permits, and some of it is just triage. The absolute first responsibility that we had was to stop the ash from getting into the river. But I think probably the single biggest issue was that for several weeks, the river was so high that it wasn't safe to get in it. And a consequence of that is that there was a lot of dispersal of ash that happened and made, spread it out farther. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Dawn Witter. I just have a question about the ash that's going to be left, that you said was going to be left in the river. I know that on your slide you said selenium was part of what is in the river. I do know that selenium, from reading certain articles that I've actually come in contact with, that selenium can actually cause reproductive issues, like massive reproductive issues. In the areas that you can't really tell what's mud and what's ash, but you know that there's a percentage there, is the amount that's going to be left in the river enough to cause issues, and is that part of your assessment process ongoing?
I think the summary of the question was what's the concern about selenium, especially in the sediments long term, and it can cause reproductive issues. I will say that potential for causing reproductive issues in fisheries is one of the things that we certainly will need to look at as part of the natural resource damage assessment. I said we were going to continue to do sampling. The sampling that we will do will include some sediment sampling. I referred to some screening levels earlier, and that'll be the best way that we'll be able to tell whether or not there is a concern. Whether the selenium is coming from the coal ash or from other sediments that are there is irrelevant. The question is how much selenium is in the sediment, and that's something we'll need to continue to look at.
I have two questions. Danville City Council, Fred Shanks. I have two questions with regard to the coal ash, then hopefully I'll get a couple other questions in later. You noted on the latest slide that it appears 39,000 tons of coal ash entered the river. Do you have an estimate of how much was captured at the site where the boom was, and how much quantity was captured or is to be captured around Schofield Dam?
I don't have that estimate. I have the estimate that I do have is that what was captured upstream or right below it was less than 0.5%, was it not? Okay, 22 tons. 22 tons was captured below, immediately below. So out of the 39,000, pretty small amount. It's going to be a much smaller amount at Schofield Dam. What I did hear earlier was that that there is a pocket of ash there that might get up to 10 inches thick, maybe down to as little as 1 inch thick. You get down to 1 inch or less, it's probably going to do more damage recovering it than you would. I don't know what that is in terms of tonnage. Do we have an estimate on tonnage with that? I don't see.
In cubic yards, it's roughly equivalent. A cubic yard is about a ton. So for every cubic yard that they can recover, they'll get about a ton of ash.
But right now we don't exactly know how many cubic yards that
They've got
is.
an estimate of the aerial coverage, but the depth is going to determine how much in volume they can get out.
So actually what's being captured is very small.
It's a very small amount, and most of it is being dispersed into the river system. That's exactly right. And referring to the last question, if we hadn't had the high water, I think we would have gotten more. You know, what percentage that would have been of the 39,000, I'm not sure. There's a question here.
Yeah, Lee Vogler, Danville City Council. You mentioned the precipitation and the rising river levels. What is the concern level in regards to flooding, whether it be a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, as that water begins to seep into the, farmland alongside the river and subsequently the cattle? What is the, I guess, the concern level, or also what is the game plan? Is that something we need to be concerned about, and what's going to be done in that aspect?
The question was, what's the concern for cattle, and if some of it gets on the floodplain? We have done some preliminary assessments of concentrations of metals, and initial response is that our initial determination is that there's a low level for concern. We'll certainly want to confirm that with the Virginia Department of Agriculture, and that will also be something that we'll look at as part of the natural resources damage assessment, the long-term look. The initial first cut estimate is not overly alarming.
David, can you tell the group a little bit about the meeting that you're going to have with Tennessee, who had this same issue 5 years ago, and maybe try to if you maybe could talk about some of the lessons that maybe they learned and what we're trying to bring here to Southside?
Yes, as some of you will remember, there was a much larger coal ash release in Tennessee, probably about 5.5 or 6 years ago. The EPA representative who looked at that is actually going to be joining us tomorrow, and we're going to be asking him exactly the questions that Delegate Marshall is putting to us. What have you seen? What have you seen in terms of floodplain concerns? What have you seen in terms of accumulation of fish over 5 years? Has there been a problem with fish consumption after the fish have had time to take that up? So it's bad news for Tennessee. It's good news for us that we can learn some lessons, and we can see maybe a little bit of of a look forward of the things that we need to be concerned about. So we will be consulting with EPA and with Tennessee in that regard to make sure that we're asking all the right questions.
And David, as a follow-up, can you post that so that you can let the public know what those questions that were asked and what they were answered?
I'll do the best we can. It's we will have people there, and I'll ask our folks to take some notes, and it may take us a little bit of time to get a summary together, but that would make a lot of sense. In the back?
Excuse me, sir, the DEQ plan legal action against Duke Energy at any point?
We do.
What form will that?
Well, there are Clean Water Act violations. It's a little bit too early for me to speculate on what those are. That's a violation of the federal law. The EPA has a claim with regards to that, as does North Carolina and Virginia. And since it's an enforcement action, that's probably all I should say about it, other than there is a Clean Water Act violation here for which Duke Energy will be held accountable. Yes.
I'm Katie Whitehead, a Pennsylvania County resident. I understand from news reports that a critical part of the problem preceding the North Carolina spill was the influence of Duke Energy on public officials, both elected legislators and conceivably the governor, and on agency officials. Who owns the ash ponds in Virginia, and what can you tell us about their lobbying contributions?
I can't tell you anything about their lobbying contributions because I haven't looked that up. The question is who owns the ash ponds. American Electric Power and Dominion Power own those ash ponds. And they are on sites near their coal generation facilities. But in terms of their lobbying, I don't have any really comments to make.
Are you aware of their proposing any rules or regulations related to coal
I am not aware of any proposals for regulations. I have had some inquiries and discussions with members of the legislature who are asking themselves what, if anything, else needs to be done to make sure that we are safe in Virginia. I don't think any decisions have been made there, but clearly we need to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen from our ash ponds. And so those are questions that are underway, and that's or that are being asked, and it's too early to say what happens with that.
What are Virginia's regulations regarding the potential for leaks in the ash basins? You said that the data is being reviewed. What are the rules? What are the regulations?
The question is, what are the regulations concerning the ash ponds? If there's groundwater contamination, we would require remediation of that. These ponds were built at a time when the rules were very different than what they are right now, and there isn't provision to upgrade old ponds to new liner specifications and that sort of thing. So ponds were built according to the regulations that were in place at the time, and I haven't done that research to tell you which regulations match up with which ponds, but I will say that our water quality standards are such that degradation of water quality is not acceptable, notwithstanding what regulations were in place at the time, and that's one of the things that we'll be reassessing.
And is that, in North Carolina, I understand that there was a distance of 500 feet that a plume reaching 500 feet was at one point a cutoff?
I can't,
Okay.
I don't have any knowledge of what North Carolina's.
But Virginia, when you say groundwater quality, is that any degradation of groundwater, or is it beyond a certain distance?
in many cases of fence line, leaving the fence line of property. Value is the point where water quality standards need to be protected, but we also have to look at whether or not there are any uses on that property that would be contravened by any standards that are on the property, and so it's a case-by-case assessment. We probably should let some other people ask some questions.
I don't mean to be.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, Captain Ed.
Hey, I'm Morris Lawson. I'm on the river probably 1 or 2 days a week right now until fishing season gets going good. What about all the dead mussels and clams? It's by the millions it's washed up, and the turtles.
I've been answering all the questions. I'm going to let the game department answer that question.
Thank you, David. David Whitehurst from the Department of Game, Land, and Fisheries. We will actually be going out tomorrow to start sampling for mussels. We have gotten some reports that these little small mussels that are smaller than your fingernails have been dying. That's a mussel that actually is an exotic species called Cobicula, and they actually will have die-offs during a different time of year, and of course the shells tend to stay there. So what we'll be looking for is, freshly dead mussels.
These still have the meat in them.
Okay, if that's
And
occurring.
it's also that James spiny mussel is in there because I picked them up.
Okay, I'm not aware of the James spiny mussel.
It's an endangered species that we have in our river.
Okay, well, we're looking for green floaters, but
I can take you to where there is millions of them right down the bottom of the hill right here.
All right.
And I got pictures in my pocket.
Well, we will get with you afterwards because we've got people going out sampling tomorrow
Right.
to actually look for mussels.
I can take you right to them.
Okay, yeah, we're looking at that, and we've been on site since we were out with the first sampling crews and have been on the river most of the time, assisting our partners with DEQ and the Fish and Wildlife Service, but we will be doing mussel surveys tomorrow. Talk to you afterwards.
And that, any mussel mortality, that sort of thing, absolutely we need to try to quantify. If it's a result of the spill, we need to quantify it and okay, well, I would suggest you talk to David afterwards and help point him to the right locations. Thanks. Did we have another question?
Yeah, I'm James Buckner, a citizen here in Danville. Just curious as to when we could expect to see some cleanup in Schoolfield and how long that may take.
Do we know what the time for that is, John? The question is when will the Schoolfield removal of ash start, and how long will it take?
My name is John Kennedy. I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality. I've been attending these planning meetings up at Duke Energy to look at the long-term assessment and the monitoring. And my understanding was yesterday they secured a contractor to go ahead with some of the removal, particularly the Schoolfield dam site, as well as they're going to be taking the backwash solids out of the water treatment plants. They were very intent on getting a contractor to that location as soon as the water levels allowed them to do that. If the EPA Miles, do you happen to know if they were getting there any soon? They were working to get permits working. Right. Tomorrow we'll do a 30 minutes. They're going to 30-minute presentation with our weekly meeting, and then they're going to finalize plans soon to get to the Corps and Fish and Wildlife. And once they hit the water, probably clear them up. Right. We have to make sure we dot I's and cross our T's. Then about 3 months in the river to clean up that area. Yes.
So I think the answer was hope to start within a month. You have to get permits from the Corps. Should take about 3 months to do it. They'll suck it out. Big vacuum cleaner. Yes, sir. Yeah. He's pointing to you, so.
Oh,
Oh,
hey.
oh, here. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm Heather Rosenbaum with ABC 13. I was wondering, for those 11 coal ash ponds that are in Virginia, what are y'all going to do? You said that you're planning to clean up 5 by 2016. I guess I have a few questions. What are y'all going to do with the other 6? Are all of them right now unlined, and what waterways are potentially affected? Are there any in Central and South Side Virginia that are potentially affected by all of them right now?
Okay, that's a lot of questions.
I know, sorry. We can go one at a time. other six?
There are about 11. I think 5 of them are proposed to be closed out. Those are being closed out at the initiative of the owner, the company. I don't have that list with me. We can provide that. The other 6, they're still, we will, as it stands right now, we will continue to monitor them. We will look at groundwater quality to make sure that we don't have any concerns there. The Department of Conservation and Recreation actually is the one who is responsible for making sure that we look at the berms and make sure that they keep their integrity, and that's what the law provides for at this point.
So are they not violating the Clean Water Act and DEQ was the same issue in North Carolina?
The violation of the Clean Water Act that Duke had was when the water was when the ash made it into the river. Now, I don't have any other sort of information that would make me the right person to discuss what their status in North Carolina was. But the ones that we have in Virginia are in compliance with the law.
So all of them are unlined, though? All of them?
I don't have that exact list, but I think the majority of them are probably unlined because they were built a long time ago. Or at least not lined to the degree that current standards would call for.
Okay, and what waterways would they potentially be, affecting, if something like this happened to any of them that are currently,
I can get you the list of sites and you can look at that rather than me try to pull it out of my head.
Yes, sir. With the coal ash spill building a residue on the channel of the Dan River, will this have long-term impact on the striped bass hatchery that it was there before?
The question is whether or not this will have an impact on the striped bass hatchery, and I'll let David answer that.
The buildup of sediment on the river bottom. Now, is that going to affect the striped bass and other fish as well?
Well, as the presentation indicated, if fish are impacted, it'll occur over time. I certainly don't expect any impacts now because if this is going to impact the fish, it's most likely going to be metals that accumulate in fish tissue over time. We don't have any indication of that occurring now. The striped bass hatchery that you're talking about is actually over in the Stanton River at Brookneal. Yes, there's the striped bass run up both rivers out of Carr Reservoir, and but the hatchery, the place that we actually spawn them is on the other river. They spawn in the Dan River, and when they spawn, the egg actually takes on water and floats. So the egg will be turned over in the water column itself as opposed to laying right down the bottom. So we don't anticipate any short-term problems with fish reproduction. If those problems occur, it most likely will occur over a longer period of time as those metals accumulate in the adult fish tissue. It rolls for a short period of time before it takes on water, and then it. Yeah. Well, we would think so because there's an awful lot of sediment in that river anyway before the coal ash. So they've pretty much adapted to dealing with the pretty high sediment loads, as you've seen. Yeah.
Okay. Follow-up question?
Yes. Going back to the TVA spill, you mentioned 5 or 6 years ago. Was there an impact of that coal ash on the fisheries there?
Well, I understand they actually had a fish kill. There were some fish mortality that was immediately the result of the spill. So there was a lot more ash. I think the water column concentrations of metals were higher, but I haven't looked at it in a great deal of detail yet. We do intend to do that.
Yeah, Gary Miller, I'm a physician, so I'm a sportsman too, so I'm concerned about fish, but what about humans? Do we have any data on the long-term ingestion of these metals as far as causing cancer downstream several years from now? You know, there's certain cardiac medicines, if you take them episodically for 2 weeks or 3 months, they don't affect your mortality from a heart attack. But if you take them chronically over years, they do affect your mortality statistically significantly. Do we have any data from Tennessee or any place else where there are increased incidences of cancers or any other kind of disease from ingesting these metals?
I'm not going to propose to answer that with a physician answering the question. I haven't seen those data, but those are the questions that we should ask the Tennessee, and the health department can maybe help with that.
Yes.
I'm Rebecca Laprelle. I'm an environmental epidemiologist with the State Department of Health, and we are taking a close look at all the metals that we're seeing in the river. Those levels are very, very low, and our toxicologist is looking at those chemicals one by one to make sure that they don't exceed any health-based comparison levels. But right now, there's no reason for concern in terms of health goes. Our district health director, Dr. Aurora, is here as well, and can help address any specific questions regarding
And one more
cancer.
question about the maximum allowable limits. Well, our maximum allowable limits in Virginia are different from probably North Carolina, higher than California. Now, I don't think the people in California are that much different than people in Virginia. How are these levels set that in California they allow a much lower level to be normal or allowed? Virginia, it's higher. How are these negotiated levels, or why is it different from one state to another? The maximum safe level of a metal or any chemical in water?
I can't speak to why they might be different from California. So from what we use at the health department is mostly minimum risk levels, and those are health-based comparison values established by CDC and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And when those comparison values are not available, then we would use other health-based comparison levels that are established by federal agencies like the EPA. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question, but I don't know why they would be different. But I can say that our levels that we're using for comparison's sake are very health protective.
Thank you.
And would include any potential risks to recreational water users for the short term and the long term. I hope that answers your question.
And I guess I would add that as far as the water quality standards that I referred to, those are for the protection of aquatic life. Those standards, by and large, come from EPA. Some states have the ability to choose lower standards, but there is a minimum federal standard that EPA has to agree to for all our water quality standards.
If regulations do change to say that the ponds need to be an X number of distance away from a river or body of water or thing like that, will that be reflected in the ponds that are existing? Will they have to move as a result, or would that not change anything?
Well, that would be speculative, but usually if there are any regulations that that are proposed or laws that are proposed to move existing ponds, they would have to specifically talk about those existing ponds. Most regulations are prospective and not retrospective.
If those regulations were put in to effect that you were just talking about existing ponds, who would bear the cost of doing those? Would the owners of them, Dominion, or would the taxpayer?
The question is who would pay for upgrading or closing out those ponds, and I'm not sure that that I can answer that. It would either be Dominion and or the ratepayer, depending on whether or not those costs could be passed on, and that's outside of my purview.
Fred Shanks again, Danville City Council. Last month, City Council was invited down to Duke's Rivers power plant, and during the course of that visit, we were told by one of the Duke officials that they had all the permits required for the facility. And he said the only permits that were required was a dam inspection permit. As I understand it, stormwater permits are required by the Clean Water Act. Is that true? And as I understand it, DEQ is charged with enforcing that in Virginia, and Diener is in charge of enforcing that in North Carolina. Isn't it appropriate to include the fact that there were no stormwater permits, which have been polluting the river for years, as part of this action that DEQ would take against Duke Energy?
Let you give that to him. I'm not going to speculate on the enforcement action that we might take, other than to say that we certainly will take all factors into account.
But you will confirm that stormwater permits would have been required in a facility like that? In Virginia?
In Virginia?
Yes.
Industrial general permit? So yes, the answer is yes.
And the general permit is part of the EPA requirements, right?
It is a federal permit, yes.
Okay, thank you.
First, let me start with a comment. I just want to say thank you to all of the different organizations, because there's not a place that we go, and it doesn't matter what age the young person is, an adult, someone is always asking us about the coal ash spill. So I want to thank you all for being here, because the information is much needed to the entire public. I have to agree with Delegate Danik Marshall. When you get a chance to meet with our friends in Tennessee, how soon do you think, once you meet with them, that we can get that information? Our city manager told us that all of the information is on the website. As much as the public can get, how soon can we get that? And again, thank you all so much for being here.
We'll do our best. Not knowing exactly how much information it is, we will at least begin to put that up within a week's time. It may not be comprehensive because I don't know exactly what we're going to hear, but we'll begin to address some of that stuff within a week's time. And we'll make sure it's on our website, and then make sure the right people knows that, so that they can link to it.
I'm sorry for earlier, I didn't identify myself. Mike Weekly, I'm a private property owner concerned with this. And I'd kind of like to put forth a proposal to the Department of Game and Inland Fishery, but we're in question, so I'll try to do it in the way of a question without asking. But to follow up on this gentleman's question to you about the mussel, there's a paper out front that identifies 3 species of aquatic life. So I kind of wonder, wouldn't it be better for you to know what you're going out there looking for tomorrow instead of trying to find out once you get there?
Do you have any comments? I think he's trying to read it.
Yeah. We have been, as I said to start with, we've been out here since day one, and we've been advising the Fish and Wildlife Service. We're very aware of the Roanoke log perch was a federally endangered species. We're very aware of the green floater, which is a federally endangered species. I'm still not certain that the James River spiny mussel has been documented in this watershed. So we'll be checking with our staff to. Okay. It does say it's found in the Dan River Basin. Yes, and we do have very good, excellent malacologists. So if this is correct, then it's my era. I don't get to. I've been on this river longer than you have, but not for a long time. So I used to work this river 40 years ago, but we weren't looking too much at mussels. Well, we weren't looking at mussels too much back then.
Another question?
What is how open are you all, the government agencies, to working with citizens and local organizations and identifying the areas that are most impacted? I mean, your TVA spill didn't have a local environmental organization. We do, and we have a lot of citizens who spend a lot of time on that river. How open are you to working closely with those people who know this river inside and out?
We would like to hear from all of the citizens who know it, and especially that's critical to the natural resource damage assessment, because there may only be a few of us, but there are a lot of folks, and so when you know of concerns, there's a portal, I believe, on our website that allows you to get information to us. You can call our Roanoke office of DEQ, which you can find on the website, and as we begin to get further into the natural resource damage assessment with the Fish and Wildlife Service, I suspect some other linkages will be created as well. John, you want to add something?
Yeah, we're already in correspondence with the Dan River Basin Association, and they've expressed an interest in doing some benthic monitoring. It's stations that they may have private land access that we don't. We are looking to partner with them, and as this long-term monitoring and assessment plan is being developed, we'll be identifying the station locations that DEQ, North Carolina, Diener would be going to, and we're looking for these citizens organizations to perhaps fill in some of the areas of the river that we can't get to. So those discussions are ongoing right now.
Hey, so
Yes.
as you know, a lot of folks from this area go in the summertime when it's not this cold and awful outside, but go to Clarksville and Bugs Island to swim, go out on the river or the lake there. And obviously this water runs into there. Any word on if people can go in the river there or near the water, or how that's going to affect that area?
I'll let the health department respond to that.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Laprelle again with the Virginia Department of Health, and great question. We recognize that it's cold out, so not a lot of people are probably swimming and recreating in the lake right now. What we are advising people currently is to exercise caution. So if you see any floating ash or coal sludge, coal slurry, to avoid those areas and to avoid contact with any coal ash. We do want to reassure you, though, that the levels we're seeing in the river water are very low, if not non-detect, of the chemicals that have been tested. So that is very good news. And we also want to remind people that when swimming or planning a trip along any untreated or unfiltered body of water, so natural body of water, there could be other harmful viruses and bacteria present. So it's important, regardless of any chemical spill or any chemical release, to take the right kind of precautions. So don't ingest the water. Don't go into the water when you're sick, because that can make you more susceptible to illness. Don't go swimming when you have an open wound. Just take a good common sense approach before you go swimming in any natural body of water. Right now, we're advising people to exercise caution, and we have not advised people not to use the river.
You know, I think that's gonna hurt the economy in Florida.
What's that? I didn't hear your question.
Affect the economy in Florida, above Island Lake.
Oh, I'll hand that back over to.
Well, it may, because people are gonna be afraid of it. That's part of the assessment we're gonna make. If there's a drop in use of the river, then that's a problem. That's if it's a direct result of this spill. So we're gonna have to look at that. But you know, the fishing, in terms of what's been said about fishing, is you don't have any more concerns than you had before. And the main thing that I have heard from the health department and EPA is avoid direct contact with the ash itself. That can be an irritant to the skin.
I know when I was up in Maine for a while, we had a lot of issues with the paper mills and the chemicals that would go into the river, some of the slurry that would be dumped in. I know when they started their cleanup up there, they did like biodegradable dyes to watch the river flow to see where the settlements would settle. Is that part of the plan, or is there something new? How will you find where the deposits actually naturally settle? Is that reliant just on people who know the river, or are you going to do some of these the biodegradable chemical releases? Because that's something, if we see the water color changing, we might want to be alerted to beforehand so we don't freak out.
I think it's mainly done by sediment analysis to determine if there's ash content in the sediment or not. We don't have any really remote kind of technology that you could use for that I'm aware of. Is that an adequate answer? Yeah, okay.
All right, say this stuff, the river gets up and it gets out of the banks and dries. The water goes back down, this ash dries on the bank. We got miles of walking trails. These people is running up down their walking trails. Say the wind gets to blow and picks the ash up, they breathe it. What does that do for them? How is it going to affect our walking trail system that Danville's put thousands and thousands of dollars into? Who wants to answer that?
I'm looking to see if the health department wants to answer that. What I've
and,
brief.
Well, I'm sure you got people walking down there that's got respiratory problems.
I would also encourage you, if that scenario that you outlined occurs and you're seeing significant stretch ash and is blowing up, we need to know that. We need to hear that. I think.
Are they going to post signs down there that say that?
I think we're going to have about 2 more questions, then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Hi. Is there a current command and control center for this incident at this time? And if so, where is it, who's in it, and who's in charge of the situation as of right now?
There is a current command and control center. It's called the Unified Command. I guess I would say that EPA is in charge. It's shared between EPA Region 3 and Region 4. 3's in Philadelphia, 4's in Atlanta. We have set up what we call a unified command, so they are. It is a collaboration between those agencies and North Carolina state agencies and Virginia state agencies, and we collaborate to make decisions. And the portal into that is our website at DEQ is deq.virginia, spelled out, .gov, and there's a link on that that'll take you to the EPA website. That's the easiest way to find it. And EPA, are you still putting up sit reps every day? So that you can see a whole sit rep stands for situation report. And you can see a situation report for every day that's up there, but that's how it's being handled. Last question.
Again, Katie Whitehead. At the federal level, I understand that EPA is in the middle of a process of determining whether or not coal ash should be classified officially as a hazardous waste. What are the implications for Virginia and North Carolina and storage of coal ash?
EPA is in fact in the process and has been for 4 or 5 years now, since the TVA event, of reassessing their coal ash regulations to see if it should be regulated as a solid waste or a hazardous waste. That is a determination they have yet to make. The question is, what are the implications for Virginia if it is a hazardous waste? I probably shouldn't speculate on the implications for the existing sites, other than I suspect EPA would give us some guidance in that regard if they make that decision. One of the other implications would be, one of the uses of coal ash right now is it's actually allowed to be recycled into construction material and things like that. If it's deemed a hazardous waste, beneficial reuse would not be an option for coal ash going forward.
Thank you.
So I think we're right at 6:30 when the council wanted us to let them get ready for their meeting. Thank you. It's been a very good crowd. Some great questions. I appreciate it. We're in this for the long haul. We're going to make sure that the right thing is done for the river and the right thing is done for the citizens of the localities and for the Commonwealth at large. And just want to assure you that that's a high priority of ours. And I think you know it's one of the governors as well. He was here earlier today at the water treatment plant site just to sort of reassure himself that things are moving as they should be. So thank you very much, and I believe the Vice Mayor would like to make a few closing remarks. No?
I just want to thank you for coming today and coming to the water treatment plant and answering our questions there, and appreciate all the work you're putting in. And thank you for the public for coming. This is most beneficial. The questions were great, and the information received from some of the public was very good. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.